Hello ladies and gents, this is the first of 6 interviews recorded for the Making of GoldenEye. I'll be uploading these in the order in which they were recorded. First up is Karl Hilton, credited as Scenic Art Director. Karl did level design and built some of the other graphics and UI, etc. We talk about his background in architecture, how he came to work at Rare, GoldenEye of course, and also his projects after GoldenEye including Time Splitters. If you haven't watched the Making of GoldenEye, I recommend watching that first, as it's better hearing from all 6 developers together on the development of the game. I'm no professional interviewer, so this is quite informal, but Karl was great to talk to. I've edited out some pleasantries at the start, so we'll dive right into the questions. Enjoy. So I guess before getting to GoldenEye and everything, I just wanted to get a bit of background. What was your background prior to coming to Rare, and how you actually came to get the job at Rare?
Good question. Yeah. I come from a sort of art background. I was doing my original BA was in architecture, which I was doing up in Birmingham, and my father's an architect, and I was into drawing and art and design, so architecture seemed like a good thing to follow up. So I went and did my BA in architecture. Obviously, as a kid, as a teenager in the 80s, I grew up with the 8-bit computers, with Spectrums and Commodores and Ataris, and I was always with a friend of mine. We used to sit down at weekends and in the evenings and try and write video games ourselves in basic and very rudimentary sort of machine code assembly language. And we used to send the listings off to the magazines at the time. They used to publish the listings in the back, and you can make like 25 quid if they published it, which at that time was like, ooh. So we made a little bit of money on the side doing that, wrote some pretty awful games, but it was all right. Then I went off to university and did that, and they were just setting up sort of computers were just coming into architecture at that time, and they actually set up a lab there. That the second year they set up a lab filled with Macintoshes, older Quadras they were called. They had about 18 of them on a course of 60 people, and I thought, oh brilliant, that's exactly what I want to do because I like computers. So I went and said, I'll do that please. And I was expecting to have to fight off the other students for computers, but actually there was only a handful of us that were interested. So I ended up in this, the entire second and third year, I was basically in a computer lab with a couple of other people surrounded by what at the time were very nice Macintosh computers. And you still had to do your big sort of drawings on A1 tracing paper, and you still had to make cardboard models, but I was allowed to also present computer models. So that's why I sort of started learning how to do 3D modeling and use Photoshop and that kind of stuff. So I would render out very basic 3D models of my buildings and then put it into Photoshop and paint it all up and make it look nice. And I did some animations as basic animations. So I had, fly throughs my buildings and flying around my building and my building rotating and this sort of stuff. So my degree show was everyone had to do a degree show for their buildings, and mine had a few drawings and a cardboard model and then a load of screens that I set up, and it had all these models spinning on it, and I got a lot of interest for that. I mean, I enjoyed doing it. I'd taken all the computers home during the holidays so they could render up because it was really slow. So I had a huge amount of computer modeling, and there was half the course thought it was brilliant and really loved it, and the other half thought it was atrocious and wasn't real architecture. And and I ended up getting a 2-2, and thought, well, this clearly isn't for me then. So I went to Bournemouth for during my year out. You've got to go back. You've got to do 3 years, and then you've got to go out, and then you've got to come back for 2 more years. And during that year out, I was looking around, and I found a course in Bournemouth University, which was at the time the only course in the country doing computer graphics, and it was called Computer Graphics and Animation Systems. So I transferred down to that. I gave up the architecture and went down and did the MA course in that, which was 1 year long, and that was just learning how to use Power Animator and the local thing they'd written called Seagal, which was sort of Pascal basic kind of writing, and did all that, and absolutely loved it, and just spent a year creating computer graphics animations, and Rare recruited from that course. So I went to quite a few interviews and didn't get any of them, and then Rare, the one on the Tuesday said you should talk to Rare because I think you're right up their street. And I went and had an interview with them, and yeah, they offered me a job there and then. So
Wow.
So I ended up at Rare. Yeah.
Brilliant. So
as an environment artist, I mean, what I took along was all my architecture drawings and the animations that I'd done, but also lots of architecture stuff. And I'm into photography, so I'd done a lot of photography. So they offered me a job as an environment artist because I clearly understood buildings and light,
So was GoldenEye your first project then coming on, or?
Almost. When I turned up, you went into a little training room in the main farmhouse, and they asked me to do some models, and they were doing some brochures for some investment stuff they were doing, and they asked me if I could do a 3D model of Mario, and could I also do a 3D model of a Ferrari F355. Unbeknownst to them, I'm a huge Ferrari fan, and I had loads of Ferrari 355 models, real one, metal die-cast ones. So I brought those in, and I just sat there. I mean, I couldn't believe my luck. I turned up first job, and within 2 months, they said to me, "Can you model a Ferrari F355?" And I'm like, "Oh yes." So I spent a couple of months modeling that and doing a Mario for them and this kind of stuff. And then they were working on a game at the time called Killer Instinct, which was the fighting game. They'd done an arcade version, and they were doing a SNES version, and they asked me to do a couple of backgrounds for that. And I was sort of just getting into that when Martin Hollis, the team lead for GoldenEye, came along and said, "Oh, we might be doing a James Bond game. Do you like James Bond?" And yeah, I mean, I love James Bond, so I said, completely honest, I said, "Yeah, absolutely love James Bond. Seen all the movies, know them all by heart. Happy to do that." So he said, "Right." So I turned the next day. I was basically moved out into the this other building where there was myself, Martin Hollis, and Mark Edmonds, who were the two main programmers, and that was it to start with. That was the three of us.
So you said there you were obviously a big Bond fan. Was it nerve-wracking working on such a huge franchise, or I suppose maybe in a way you didn't know any different because it was early days there?
Yeah, absolutely. Total naivety on that part. I mean, I remember, I think it was the first day that I was in the new building, and Martin came in and he had a copy of the script, which had all these stamps on it to show where it was gone, because obviously it was still being filmed, so that it was top secret. And it was like, you must look after this. So I was allowed to read through the script, and he came in holding a 35mm camera really badly, and I'm like, "Oh, don't hold it like that." And he said, "Oh, do you know about cameras?" So I said, "Yeah, I do photography quite a lot." So he said, "Oh, great." He said, "We're going to go down to the studio tomorrow. You can take the camera and take all the photos." So it's like, okay. And it was amazing. I mean, the next morning, this Mercedes limousine pulled up in Rare, and we got in the back of it, and we got driven down to Leavesden, where they were filming. And basically, I think we did that about 7 or 8 times in the end. But basically spent the day being chaperoned by one of the producers around the sort of all the different sets, and we got to go back, obviously behind everything, and take photos of all of the sets that they weren't using at the time, and props and the costumes and things like that. And then at that point we had spent absolutely no time on any kind of production, so we had no idea what we wanted. So I just basically took photographs of absolutely everything, and this was obviously 35mm film. So I had rolls and rolls of film with me, and I was photographing anything and everything. So yeah, when I came back, I had a stack of photos. After a few days like this of just everything. Like, well, we don't know what we're going to make yet, but you better make sure we've got everything we can find. And they gave us blueprints for the sets as well, so we could see the layouts of things like the archives and stuff. So it's like, okay, this is how the set is being built, and this is what it's going to look like. So that was easy to see how they were doing that. So we got a lot of accessibility, but yeah, it was complete sort of in the dark.
Wow. So was that like a one-shot deal? You visited the set once, or did you ever get to go back if you'd missed anything? Or
we went back, I think, like I said, 5, 6, 7 times in the end. I can't remember, over several weeks, when they could fit us, in. And so and also obviously they were building sets and then tearing them down. The first time we went there, they were still building out on the main runway, because it's an old helicopter factory originally for Rolls-Royce, Leavesden, where they. And it was the first time it had been used, I think, for filming. The Rolls-Royce factory had shut down and was being turned into a studio. And I remember because over in the corner, the next film they were going to shoot there was The Phantom Menace. Oh, wow. And there were all these things in the corner of the field covered in tarpaulins, and we were told that's the new Star Wars film stuff, and you absolutely can't go over there. You could see it. And I did see one of the tanks, the droid tanks. You could see one of the things sticking out the bottom. You wondered what it was, but yeah. So they were, that first time we went, they were still building all the St. Petersburg streets on the runway area. So we were building stuff. So we said, "Oh, we need to come back and get photographs of that later." So once that was built, we came back and took all those photos for the St. Petersburg stuff, because half of that was filmed in St. Petersburg and the other half was filmed in Leavesden on the runway.
Wow. So you're, I think in the credits you're credited as scenic art director. It
Yes.
sounds like you did quite a bit. So I've got notes that you were lead environmental artist. You built a lot of the levels and a lot of the multiplayer levels, or at
Yes.
least some. And then the weapons and the user interface. Is that accurate?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes. Yeah, it's I mean it was a very small team, obviously. I came on board first, so I ended up, in terms of what I built, in terms of environments, I built most of the environments. Duncan Bott, with the designer, built some of the layouts initially and did some texturing and then handed it over to me later. And B Jones, she was our main character artist, but she did a few. She did all the characters and the costumes and stuff for the characters. But other than that, it was me doing pretty much. I allowed a few months for each environment and just powered through them all. And then we didn't have a 2D artist, so if you look at GoldenEye, all of the 2D art, all the sort of the UI stuff is all actually 3D models that have been rendered flat. So that was me doing all of that, and same with all the icons for the bullets and stuff. It was just me rendering little bullets in Alias and then flattening them out and going in and hand editing them to try and make them look a bit better. I mean, the resolution is super low, so you had very little to work with. So yeah, it was quite thrown together. Same with the folders and the files. That was a 3D model that I made. The On Her Majesty's HSS Secret Service crest is actually the crest of my passport that I scanned in, which I don't think you probably were allowed to do, but anyway. So it was just me throwing everything together, because it was, making video games in those days was fun because it was such a small team, and so you had to do a lot of different things.
So it's quite a speedy process. You turn up, next day you're told, we're doing a Bond game, go grab your camera and all this. So at that point, what type of game was it at that point?
We weren't sure initially. I mean, we there was myself, Mark, and Martin, and we were sort of talking about what we could do. Because obviously originally it was supposed to be a Super NES game, and Martin had only taken on the project on the condition that we could do it on the N64 because Rare knew that was coming. We'd been told by Nintendo that it was on its way, and we said, well, we don't want to do a SNES game. We want to do, the SNES, the new Super Nintendo game, because Project Reality, as it was called at the time, because we knew it was going to be 3D, and we thought, well, 3D is much more interesting. So we were looking at 3D. I mean, initially we were talking about things like, if you remember the original GTA games, which was sort of look down, they were sort of pseudo 3D downward camera, facing camera. Because it was kind of like Spy Hunter as well. So we're thinking, well, you could do, car chases and guns. It could be a sort of cross between GTA 3 and Spy Hunter. We were going to the local town and playing. There was a Sega arcade there, and we were playing a lot of Virtua Cop. And we thought, actually, Virtua Cop would be great. And we were playing a lot of Doom as well. And we thought, first-person shooter is fun. But we didn't know what the console could do. And we assumed it wasn't going to be that powerful. So we figured maybe an on-rails like Virtua Cop, where you'd be taken around through the whole sort of movie on rails, and you'd shoot the bad guys, and and you could set everything up quite nicely. So that was our initial second plan. Was, we'll do that. And we went down. Rare gave us some money, and we went down and played the whole way through Virtua Cop from start to finish. But once the console turned up, the first version of the console turned up, and Martin and Mark started playing with it. They said, actually, I think we can take it off rails, and we can actually make it like Doom. We can actually move you through it however you want to go. So the very first level I ever built was the underneath of the big dish at the end, Arathabo, and that had been built with a track in mind, so that you went through and followed this path through it. So the first thing we did was turn that off, and then I had to go back in and sort of start ripping stuff out to make it cheaper, so that the whole thing actually could run at a decent frame rate, because I'd done some stuff that was really expensive, but it didn't matter because the camera was only supposed to point in certain directions. But suddenly it was like, oh no, you can turn and look anywhere you want. So it's like, right, in that case, I'm going to have to cheapen this all down. So that running, and actually it ran quite nicely. And it's like, okay, this is definitely free. This is going to be a free roaming first person shooter game.
Wow. So when you said there that when the first version of the console turned up, so what hardware were you using to actually develop this game?
Mainly it was done on Silicon graphics machines. So we all had either quite high-end machines. I had the big one because I was doing a lot of 3D modeling, so I had an Onyx 2 Reality engine, which was the size of a small fridge and sat beneath my desk and pushed out huge amounts of heat. And it was a really hot summer. We were sitting there with fans blowing in all directions, because there was no air conditioning in this little old converted farmhouse. So we had windows open and we were daisy chaining fans down the corridor to try and get the heat to come out of the building. But yeah, I really loved it. I mean, amazing machines. At the time, I was just staggered by this machine. I took pictures of it and sent to all my friends saying, look what I'm using. You know, I've got this Onyx 2 Reality engine. Which had some amazing games. In the evenings we'd sit and play. They had network games on it, and there was a flight simulator where you could do dogfighting, all 3D, which I'd never seen before. There was a brilliant tank game, which was great because we in the evenings spent a lot of time playing networked multiplayer games where you were shooting each other, and we just had so much fun. That's the origin of the multiplayer was that this is so much fun, we should do this in GoldenEye because it's too much fun to shoot each other. So, but yeah, we had emulators that were supposed to emulate the N64 on these machines. Obviously, when the console actually turned up, it didn't have anywhere near as much memory or stuff because they never do. So, the game that was running on those machines had to be significantly particularly the graphics the textures and stuff were all cut back down and scale back down. But it wasn't bad. I mean, it looked good. And the reason GoldenEye's frame rate is not as good as it should be is because it was quite late in the day that we really worked out what the actual performance of the machine was, and we had to go back in and start trying to get everything to at least run at whatever it does, 15-20 frames a second at least. So
you presumably were aware that it was going to be a cartridge based console, right?
Yes, very much so. And that was an issue as well because you could specify different sizes of cartridges, but they cost, obviously the memory cost. So if you said to Nintendo, well, we think it's going to be this big, then they'd say, well, that will require this size cartridge and it'll cost this much, which means from a Rare point of view, they were going to get royalties, but obviously the cost of the cartridges came out of the royalties. So it was so there was a lot of pressure for us to get the game onto the smallest cartridge possible, but I think I'm pretty sure we ended up using the biggest one that was available.
So when you were designing the levels, you said you kind of set aside an amount of time for each area. So which came first in terms of designing the level and then the objectives and everything?
The first thing was like I said earlier, we had all the blueprints. So the first thing I would do is basically build what we knew was in the movie. But obviously, film sets are often quite simple. They often just had 1 or 2 rooms and a corridor, and that wasn't anywhere near enough for the game. So I'd build that, and then I'd all the back walls and stuff that were missing because that's where the cameras and everything were. Obviously, I'd fill all that in and create a space, and then I'd sort of just try and fill it out naturally how it would feel right, and then I'd usually send it to Dave Doak, the designer at that point, or Duncan, the other designer, and say, this is what I've got so far. What do you want to do here? And then they would often come back and say, and also I draw it. I always had squared paper, so I'd have it all sort of laid out on squared paper with some sort of layouts that we could do or suggestions. And they'd often come back and actually with new things. Say, actually, I'd like to do this, and can we do this? So then I could just copy and paste. So what I could do, because everything was quite simple in terms of the polygons that we were using, I could actually copy and paste and stick them in really quickly to create the spaces, and then we could run the game again and then sort of run around those spaces. That was good from my point of view because we had, the performance was so difficult. I had to try and work. We couldn't have long corridors with lots of rooms opening off them because it wouldn't draw that. So I was trying to work out how to make sure that the thing didn't look too expensive and that we weren't drawing too much. And Dave and Duncan were trying to work out, what you could do in each space that was interesting. So, I mean, obviously we had the script, so we knew what Bond was going to be doing. In fact, halfway through the film came out, so we'd even seen it at that stage. The first half of developing the game, we knew what was going to happen because of the script, and the second half we'd actually seen the movie. So a lot of it was just like, well, let's recreate what happens in the movie, but we need a bit more because the movie's only an hour and a half, hour and 50 minutes long or whatever it is, and we need 12, 14 hours of gameplay. So it was sort of, okay, well, we know Bond does this in the film. What else can we do around that makes it more interesting? And so, that was when we started adding in extra rooms and doing extra bits on top of it. And then obviously we just, some stuff, because it wasn't really enough in the movie to make the full game, we ended up inventing some new locations as well. Either external stuff you as hinted at the film, but you don't get to see, or was completely stuff where we just made stuff up completely from scratch, like the missile silos, So
right, yeah.
It was all about just trying to get it. But I mean, Dave was the main guy in terms of sort of trying to plot a story arc through the whole thing and say, okay, well, this is what the film does, and how are we going to tie in what you do with that, So that we made that whole thing about going to 7i early on before it was operational, and then we came back later. Which meant we got to use the art, and I got to build a bit more of it, and then we created all those spaces that don't exist in the movie. But I thought, well, that we need these things for these things to happen in. So it was good fun, and I think one of the reasons why it played well in the end was because we were able to prototype those sorts of spaces very quickly and play them, and then go, yeah, that doesn't really work. Let's change it, and try and get spaces that were interesting.
So did you have input or kind of rules from MGM on what you could and couldn't use, or?
No, it was, well, a little bit, but fundamentally the rights were for the whole of the Bond franchise, which is why the multiplayer has stuff from other movies in it, because I said, yeah, whatever's in the Bond universe you can use. And then later on, obviously there's the famous thing about the 4 Bonds. We discovered we didn't have rights to all the Bond because they were famous actors, so we didn't have right to Sean Connery and those other, and Roger Moore. So they were in the game originally because we thought we did, and then we were told, no, you've got to take those out. We weren't allowed to use the Eurocopter because that was owned by whoever builds the Eurocopter, so it got renamed to the Eurochopper, because we were slightly immature. Thought it was funny. And the guy who played the CIA agent, Jack Wade, can't remember the name of that, but we didn't have rights to his face either, so he was in the game and got taken out. But other than that, yeah. So when we were doing the multiplayer, the first thing natural was, well, we should definitely do some classic Bonds, which is why we did, some of the old, the Aztec and from Moonraker and things like that. Because why wouldn't we want to do that? So it was great. Yeah, it was like full access to the whole Bond universe. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. I do like that because there's the two, even in the single player, you get the 2 bonus stages after GoldenEye, don't you? You get the Aztec and the Egyptian.
Yeah, and things like Baron Samedi, nothing to do with GoldenEye, but yeah, we can use him. Brilliant, put him in.
Yeah, Grace Jones in there, isn't she? And Odd Job. And
Odd Job, who became famous for being the cheaters. And we never even thought about that at the time. I remember we just, Odd Job's so funny, so we put him in, and it was only once the game came out and people, it clearly became an issue that people were using him because he was short and they were cheating, and it's like well, it's not really cheating, it's just the way the game is.
That's it. So I was going to ask a question about the areas of the levels we don't see, which you've answered. So designing the weapons, are they all based around, obviously with a few exceptions, are they based around real world guns? Yeah,
they were. I mean, they were all based around, we weren't allowed to call them that. It was one of the things we weren't allowed to do in the end. So, things like the AK-47, they said, no, you can't use any real world guns. I don't know if that was a licensing thing or just a Nintendo thing, because obviously Nintendo were very children focused, and they were worried. GoldenEye was a problem all the way because it was clearly quite a mature game, and Bond kills people, and that wasn't a typical Nintendo product. So they were very concerned about the violence in the game and the killing of people, and we had to, one of the versions we had, there was loads of blood in it, and we had blood coming off people, and they said, no, absolutely no way you're doing that. So we had to switch all that off. But they did let us get on with it. But yeah, things like the weapons, that's why we came up with things like the Clob name, because we had to quite late in the day. They said, no, you have to rename all those weapons to made up names. So then it was a quick right, just come up with stuff we could. So yeah, but they were all based on actual. Interestingly, if you look at the back of the box, or one of them, it shows a different AK-47 model to the one.
Really?
Because there was a model that was in there for ages. It was done very early on, and it was in there for ages. And some other artist had done it early on, who wasn't part of the team, had just done it. And I never liked it. And right at the end of the game, right at the end of the development, I had like a week left, and actually I'd finished most stuff. So I was just going through trying to improve stuff. And I thought, I'm going to remodel that AK-47. So I put a new model in and ripped out the old one. But by that point, they'd already done the screenshots for the box. So if you look at the back, of the box, the AK-47 is quite a square-looking one, and if you look at the one in the game, it's much more rounded and smooth, because one was done 2 years earlier.
Wow, I'll have a look after this conversation and see if it looks different. So gadget-wise as well, I mean, there's a few little gadgets. So you've got the watch laser in there, and I mean the mines are great. Did you put the mines in presumably before the multiplayer was a thing, or?
Yes, yeah. Martin Hollis, right from early on, was very clear that he thought one of the things that made Bond good was his gadgets. Everyone loves Bond gadget, and so we should definitely do that, because again, first-person shooters, you go around and shoot things. So what if we have some other gadgets that do other things in the game? And that was a clear, from a game design point of view, it's an absolute gift. So things like the magnetic watch and mines and anything like that. So we were very keen early on to get as many gadgets in as possible. So one of the first things I did was model those, because Mark Edmonds was the guy who did all of the weapons. The first thing he did was all the guns for shooting, and then he did all the other stuff, and it was like, let's get these working, because then we can work out what to do with them in the game. So things like the mine, yes, make it stick to the wall, brilliant, and then if you shoot it, it can be on a timer, but if you shoot it, it explodes as well, brilliant, and suddenly we had all these systems that were kind of independent. There's that classic thing of, if you play the Egyptian level at the end with Baron Samedi, you can blow him up if you set the mines up, and it's like all these sort of inconsequential things that suddenly create new things you can do, and it's like that's. So we were really keen to get as many things in, and I modeled an awful lot of things that we ended up just not having the time to really do the code for, like the piton gun that did the thing, that there was a model for that, but we never got that to use that. But it was a lot of fun, and once you realize what you could do with them, suddenly it opens up. By putting those in early on, it opened up a whole range of things where Dave and Duncan could just say, well, we've got all these tools to play with, so we can do this and we can do it, like Bond escaping by using the magnetic watch to get the that's not in the movie, but he's got a magnetic watch, so okay, we'll use that. So yeah, it was again, it's sort of serendipitous that you do something because you think it might be useful, and then it actually turns out to be much more useful than you thought it was going to be.
That's great. I think it's the little gadgets and the mines is one of the best, more fun bits of the game, and especially in multiplayer when it gets a bit.
It kind of shows you, I think, as well. Everyone's all the pre-production that you have to do and all the pre-designing you have to do, and yeah, of course you do, and particularly these days with the huge budgets. But in those days, with the way Rare was funded, we were really left alone, and we didn't do any designs before we made the game, and the whole thing was made on the fly by us, just going, this would be cool and this would be cool, and playing other games and going, oh, that's really fun, we should do something like that. And having that ability, being given the freedom and the time to just experiment and play around with stuff, it was very idyllic, and there's almost no way, it's very hard to do that today. It was hard to do that back then, but having that opportunity to do that was hugely beneficial. And I've said it before, one of the reasons I think GoldenEye played well in the end was because we got it running very early, and we sent lots of builds over to Mario Club in America, in Nintendo in Seattle, and they loved it, and they would send us back loads and loads of comments, and oh, we should do this and we should try that, and how about this, and how. So there was just lots of time to iterate and to play around with things, and that's that's the great secret to good game design is make sure you get to play your game a lot before you release it.
So, but I mean, is it roughly 3 years development? Was it
close to that? Yeah, something 2.5. Something, yeah.
So was that the plan initially? Because obviously it's very unusual for a well, it was at the time. It probably still is for a licensed game to come out so far after the film.
Yeah. No. It was supposed to hit. Well, it was kind of assumed it was supposed to come out around the time of the movie. I don't remember them ever giving us a deadline. I think it was Christmas. They originally said, "Oh, you must have it finished by the Christmas before the Bond movie came out." And it was clear we weren't going to hit that quite early on. And on the one hand, Rare were great because they didn't put too much pressure on us. And they weren't over every day. Tim and Chris Stamper or any of the guys, they weren't over every day saying, get it finished. They weren't cracking the whip. They appreciated it was looking good. They thought they weren't sure what we were doing with it, but they gave us the space to do it. And there, certainly I do remember there was sort of 2/3 of the way through when we'd missed another deadline, I mean, yeah, deadlines. They were saying, "Oh, can you have it done for the third quarter?" And we go, "Oh, maybe," and then we'd miss it. But I remember Martin Hollis getting called over to a meeting with Nintendo America, and apparently they were pretty annoyed with us, and they were, you guys are treating it like some sort of university project, and you need to get it done now. But after that, Martin came back looking a little sort of, yeah, okay, they're pretty annoyed with us. We really do need to try and get it finished now. But so at that point we cut out a few more things and did sort of try and speed it up a bit. But fundamentally, we were given the time we needed to make it good. And by the time it came out, yeah, there was a load of stuff we cut in the end, but we fundamentally made 90% of the game we wanted to make. So that's great. There was no sort of every project I worked on after that, there was always really, really tight deadlines from the publisher, and that was always the thing that hurt the quality of the game in the end, because you were just forced to cut too many corners. GoldenEye didn't have that.
So was it initially meant to be a launch game for what was known as the Ultra 64 at the time, I suppose?
Yeah. No, I don't think we ever committed to launch. I mean, it was supposed to come out as early as it could. We were at the time we were worried about Turok, because that was a launch title. I think it was very close to launch, and it was a first-person kind of shooter kind of game. And we'd seen it at a couple of shows, and we thought, it's got dinosaurs in it, and it was running very smoothly. I remember their frame rate was excellent, and we were looking at it thinking, oh damn, that's gonna sell millions, and we're gonna be screwed by it. But so we desperately wanted to make sure that our game didn't come out too far behind that, and that it was hopefully better than that. But that was the only sort of real concern from our point of view.
I mean, it was ridiculously successful, full stop. But for a licensed game, I think it's probably certainly in my opinion, the best licensed game ever. But it's kind of like it was successful despite being a licensed game in a way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's the early days of GoldenEye. I certainly remember. There wasn't a lot of enthusiasm for it. I mean, the reason Rare had been given them, Nintendo had picked the license. The story I heard was that Nintendo had picked the license up pretty cheap, because they hadn't made a James Bond movie for 4 years, because there had been some legal dispute. Movie tie-ins for games were traditionally just awful anyway. They'd all been, everyone that was just, most of them were terrible, and so there wasn't a lot of appetite for doing it. So they picked it up cheap. They'd offered it to Rare. Rare had offered it to Martin. Martin had said, "Well, I'll only do it if it's an N64 game." That had been agreed. And when Martin came to see me about it in the first place and said, "Are you interested in Bond?" On the one hand, I said, "Yeah, absolutely, love it, and yeah, love to make a Bond game." But I remember we were working in the block next to the team that were making Blast Corps, and I remember looking at what they were doing and thinking, "Oh, that's great! Their own IP, and and it's going to be a Rare game, Nintendo game, and it looks really fun." And we were working on a movie tie-in, and I was thinking, God, we've got, it's like, and I was loving doing it, but I thought, we've got an uphill struggle here, because movie tie-in games are just, and there was an awful lot of people at Rare who just, thought that, we were all students, we were fresh out of university, that, been given to a bunch of people who never made a game before, which kind of tells you what the expectation was. It wasn't given to their best team, it was given to the newbies who'd never made anything before. So the expectations, I think, were low. And we were all well aware that movie tie-in games had been traditionally pretty bad, and we had to try and not do that. So, it was it was an uphill challenge, and certainly there were plenty of people in Rare, I think, who probably didn't have any interest in working on a movie tie-in game, because Rare particularly were famous for doing lots of original IP. They made loads of great original games, and they were working with Nintendo IPs like Donkey Kong and stuff like that. So we were definitely the least glamorous project in the whole of the company when it started. And for most of it, even then, Rare were busy making all these really fun, brightly coloured kids games, Blast Corps and Jet Force Gemini and Diddy Kong Racing and these sort of things. And we were making this dark, gritty first-person shooter. And we had so much feedback, particularly from Nintendo Japan, that our game was too dark and too violent, and it wasn't a typical Nintendo game. I think there was a suggestion at one point that all Rare games were going to start with a spinning Rare logo and the sound of children laughing. And we got told that, and we're like, that's not going to fit in with James Bond. So they didn't do it for our game. I can't remember if they did put it on the others in the end, but yeah, we weren't a typical Nintendo product, and we weren't a typical Rare product. and we were doing a movie tie-in game. So yeah, it was a little concerning to all of us at the time.
I like the way it starts because you've got there's like a fake BBFC screen, isn't there?
Right, yes.
Yeah.
I can't remember whose idea that was, but yeah, we loved that. Yeah, and then we did the gun barrel thing, and I actually modelled a 3D gun for that. We had a version running where it was like the one in the movie where it was looking down the 3D gun, so all the reflections moved across the inside of the barrel. We had some issue with it, and in the end, we just didn't have a chance to do it. So it's like, okay, get rid of it. The other thing I did as well, we did a big map of the world so that you could trace Bonds moving around the world. We thought that was really cool, but again, that didn't make it in the end. But yeah, the BBFC thing was fabulously funny.
Yeah, it's a great opening.
And the thing at the end, Bond will return, which is the classic that you always get at the end of a Bond movie. And at that point, we knew we weren't doing another Bond game because they'd already told us that they hadn't got the license for the next one. But it's like, we've still got to put it in because Bond will return. So we put it in.
So do you know why they didn't get the license for the next one? Was it the success of the film, or?
I think the success of the film sort of reignited the franchise, so I suspect the cost went up. And I don't think Nintendo or Rare were that interested in spending that sort of money. And to be fair, we were asked, about what we wanted to do next, and were we interested in doing a sequel to Bond? And I think as a team, we were all pretty much of the opinion that no, we didn't want to do Bond again because we'd done it, and we wanted to, like I said earlier, Rare was famous for working on its own IP, and we all had our own ideas, so we wanted to do our own IP, and we'd learned so much in making GoldenEye that we had a lot, some very creative people in that team, so we all had ideas, and we thought, well, actually, we want to do another first-person shooter because that's what we've learned to make, but we want to do our own story. We don't really, rehashing Bond again probably isn't that interesting for us. So, you shouldn't, that tricky second album, you never want to do just a pure sequel. I think that would have been hard.
Yeah, I think it maintained a lot of the spirit of GoldenEye, but obviously there's a lot fresher than Bond, doing another Bond rather.
Yeah. I mean, Perfect Dark was, it was everything we learnt making GoldenEye was thrown into that project. Plus, we had all these, we had our own stories and ideas behind it and characters that we thought were really interesting. So, that was a hugely fun project to make. I think we'd have been in trouble keeping our enthusiasm for another Bond game. Whereas, doing our own stuff, yeah, we were absolutely fun. I mean, GoldenEye was hard. It took 2.5 years to make, and we worked unbelievably long hours. I mean, we were all young guys, either single or just girlfriends, no families or kids or anything. So we were at the studio from 8 a.m. until 10 at night, making this thing. But as soon as we had told, yeah, Perfect Dark's fine, you can make it. It wasn't called that then, but we were just bang on straight back on it again. So that was sort of the enthusiasm. I think if they said, yeah, do another another James Bond game, you possibly might not have wanted to work quite such long hours.
So do you remember presenting the game at E3, or do you remember the kind of reactions from that, if you do remember it?
Yes, yeah, it was great. We went to E3 2 years in a row, and it was both the years I think that it was in Atlanta rather than LA for a change. And so yeah, the first year it hadn't been launched yet; it was about to launch, so it was quite a complete version we took. And they've done, Nintendo. We had quite a decent chunk of the Nintendo stand, and they've done a nice, recreated some of the backdrops and stuff. They've done a really great job on it, and we were just there, standing around watching people. We hadn't seen a lot of people playing it other than ourselves and a few people at Rare. So just the chance to watch people come in and play it was great. And it wasn't a pick up and play game like a lot of Nintendo games. You had to learn. First of all, they had the controller with that was quite a thing about sliding left and right and aiming the gun and moving around, and you could see people were taking a while to get the hang of it. And I remember spending quite a lot of time with new players explaining to them how to move and shoot and stuff. We got used to it so much over time, it was like second nature, but it was like trying to, and I remember us thinking, is this too hard? People just not going to get into it. It takes too much effort. But after a couple of days, a lot of people were coming to saying, played GoldenEye, and we had the 007 t-shirts, and we had these black T-shirts which had the GoldenEye 007 logo on. And after a couple of days, people would spot that and come over, and first they'd say, "Oh, can we get one of those T-shirts from somewhere?" And then they'd say, "Oh, did you work on the game? Love it, brilliant, fantastic, really enjoyed it." So you sort of, I mean, it's a small group of people, but you came away thinking, okay, the people who are playing it like it, and they're spending time with it. So that was really sort of encouraging. And then we went back and finished it off, and it launched. And and the first Christmas it obviously sold. They didn't make enough, and it sold out, which on the one hand was great, but on the other hand, we didn't know if it has kind of missed its sort of chance. And then the next E3, we went back and they still, they had it back on the stands again, and just crowds of people all around playing it and playing the deathmatch on it, and just thinking, oh, this is great. People really like it, And so, yeah, that was, because you never know. You're so close to a game when you're making it. You never know. We enjoyed it, and we loved playing the multiplayer, but whether anyone else was going to like it or not, particularly because you see all the faults in it, everything that I thought was wrong with the art, and particularly the frame rate issues that we had, and yeah, how difficult the controls were for some people. We weren't at all sure if it was really going to be just too niche. We made something that we loved, and everyone else would go, yeah. so yeah, it was fabulous to get that first sort of public affirmation that people who hadn't played it before were playing it and getting into it and enjoying it. It was yeah, it's a nice feeling to see people enjoying something you created.
I think I've seen footage of that. It must have been that second E3, and Nintendo's booth is pretty much, it's rare this, rare that, everywhere.
Yeah.
Not just GoldenEye, but yeah, really heavy on.
Yeah, they did stuff.
Did you guys know how important Rare was to the console at the time?
Yeah, I mean, Rare and Nintendo obviously had this really close relationship. Nintendo, funded Rare to create all these games for their consoles. They'd done obviously the Diddy Kong racing stuff with SNES, and it made a real sort of step up in quality. I mean, Rare were the gold standard for that sort of 16-bit era, and obviously everything had transitioned over into 3D with the N64, and PlayStation had just come out, the first PlayStation, and that was all 3D, and they were doing Ridge Racer, and so on the one hand, there was you had the old school gamers who really didn't like 3D, and everything should be 2D and sprites. And then you had people like us who'd come along from university. I mean, I loved 3D game. I played Ridge Racer in the arcades till it was blue in the face. Just absolutely loved it. And so for me, the chance to make 3D games was brilliant. And so Rare were part of that transition onto the N64, and that sort of opportunity to do those kinds of games, and I had a PlayStation as soon as it came out, and I was playing all the games, every game I could get my hands on, which were all 3D games, and just thought they're great. So being part of that sort of move, shifting generations from 16-bit to 32-bit and from 2D to 3D, and Rare being a big part of that because of its history and its tradition. And like I said, when I started as a teenager writing games on the 8-bit consoles, Spectrum was one of the big ones, and Ultimate Play the game were the best Spectrum developer, and that was Rare. I didn't realize even at the time. It was when I went to my interview at Rare, and I was waiting in reception, and there were all these boxes on the wall of Ultimate Play the games, and I realized suddenly it's the same people, isn't it? And it's like, Jesus, so I'm going to get to meet the people who made Jetpack and Lunar Jetman and Trans Am and all these games that I played as a kid that I thought were brilliant. So that sort of being part of a Rare history and being part of that sort of quality of top gaming. There were other companies like Psygnosis who'd come along who were quite new and were making cutting edge games, but Rare had that pedigree in history. So I was, I remember the day they sent me the job offer after I'd been to the interview, I just couldn't believe my luck. It's like, God, I'm going to get to go and work for Rare. And I've met Tim and Chris since, and I've said to them then, it was the best start you could ever have in the industry, because there were so many talented people there, and you got to see what was going on, and we had that freedom to create because Nintendo backed the studio so well. So there wasn't this sort of pressure. I mean, there was the pressure to deliver, but not pressure to deliver to a budget and to a time scale. It was like, make the game good first and foremost, and we'll worry about everything else later, which is why GoldenEye was able to come out so late. They didn't can it. They didn't say, right, forget it, it's too late, you're done. They let it finish. People like Ken Lobb over in America, who was a big fan of the game and the team, and kept batting for us over there, saying, let them finish it, it'll be good in the end. So those sorts of people are really critical. And yeah, we made a good game, but we wouldn't have got it out if all those other people in Rare and the Nintendo hadn't had the confidence, and the backing. So yeah, that rare Nintendo relationship was really important.
Well, lucky for them, they did let you finish, because it was certainly a system seller, and it must have sold a lot of consoles for them. But I think it was quite a slow burner, wasn't it? It wasn't until maybe a year or more after it came out that it really sort of blew up.
Yeah, it's a funny one. It did well from the start, but they didn't. I remember there was a bet between a couple of the senior Nintendo executives about how many it would sell before Christmas, and I think it was Ken Lobb, bet it would break 1 million, and the other one hadn't, and they only made about 1 million cartridges, and then it sold out really quickly. And we had no idea what to expect, but we thought, well, 1 million cartridges in the first few months, and the Nintendo 64 hadn't been out for that long then, so it was clearly selling. Pretty much everyone who was buying the console was picking up GoldenEye at the same time, so that was like, okay, this is good. But then it was the early days of the internet as well, so very early days of the internet, so there were just a few sort of gaming forums setting up where people would chat, and all the feedback, all the magazine reviews were good, and all the feedback on the chat forums was good, that this game was great. And then we were getting all this feedback that people couldn't get it because it sold out everywhere, and there were stories of people in North America crossing into Canada because they found a store that had a couple of copies, and it was, the price of it was going through the roof on the early versions of eBay because no one could get their hands on it. So we were sort of, on the one hand, really pleased, and the other hand, really frustrated. It's like, well, because we were on royalties, we would get a bonus based on the sales. It's like, well, they're not selling any because they've sold out, and it had to be made on cartridges in Japan and then shipped across the Pacific to America and to Europe. So it was, it sold out really quickly and then dived because there was none available. But as soon as they made more, then it sold again. And yeah, I think what was interesting then was that it sold the next quarter. We got quarterly statements of how many it sold, and we figured it would die off pretty quickly. But yeah, every quarter a new statement came through, and it sold another 1 million, and then it sold another 1 million, and then it sold 1.5 million, and you're thinking, God, it keeps going, doesn't it? It's like, so and we were lucky that obviously we were out early with the N64, so obviously there was a whole lifetime of the console for it to sell. The N64 wasn't the easiest console to develop on to get the really best out of it, so I think the competition was slow in coming up against us and coming up with new stuff. So it was great to see it continue to sell, and like I said, on the forums people continue to really enjoy it, and obviously the multiplayer gave it legs, so people weren't trading it in. I mean, that was the big thing with other games. People would play it and then they trade it in, whereas people were clearly keeping hold of their GoldenEye copies because they were playing it multiplayer again and again and again with their mates. So that was an important lesson in terms of replayability, and the fact that we did all those different difficulty levels, so that you could complete it on agent, because you complete it on secret agent and then double agent, when it got harder and harder, and people really got into that kind of complete all the levels on the hardest setting, so because it was stupidly hard on those settings, and don't think any of us could do, but on those settings sort of set up to be deliberately almost impossible, but people did it. So I suspect probably Mark Edmonds and Dave Doak were particularly hot players, so I suspect they probably could do all those things, but I certainly couldn't get close to half of those things.
I think my cart back there has got 4 007 passports. They're all 4 of them completed. Yeah,
congratulations.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, I still play it quite often. I was playing it the other day. I've actually got a little 9 or 10 inch little PVM there, which is nice because the N64, like you said, the resolution isn't amazing, but it looks gorgeous on a little screen there.
I've seen stuff recently. Was it the other day? Like someone's remastered it, haven't they, in high def?
Yeah. That was from 2007. That was supposed to come out, I think.
Yeah, one of the previous Xbox, wasn't it? Or the first Xbox. Yeah, someone shared it with me on Facebook, and I was looking at it, and I said, "Oh, it was the dam level." And I said, "God, those concrete textures look lovely in that."
It's pretty nice, isn't it?
It's funny to see your stuff keep coming back again and again and again, and it's like stuff you worked on 25 years ago.
I would love to have a proper remaster of it, although I kind of like the the awkwardness of the N64 controller and the strafing, because that's how I've always played it. I'm used to it.
Yes, yeah, no, it's first person controls change over time, don't they? But that was one of the first games to do that, obviously, and the analog stick particularly, and I mean, that was one of the great things when we first sort of thought about doing Virtual Cop. We did that because we'd been given a prototype of the N64 controller, which had the little stick on the top, the analog stick, and we thought, well, this is perfect for aiming, because originally we said, about Virtual Cop, the great thing about that was you had the gun, which you pointed at the screen, and it said, well, we won't have that. But if you've got this thumbstick, then suddenly you've got a pointer, and so that could work really well. And so we spent an enormous amount of time playing with different setups, and again with the slidey thing. So we thought, well, this, for us, that felt natural. And I mean, obviously, you don't use those kinds of controls anymore, but at the time, that just felt, you can hide behind a wall and slide out, and then aim the thing and shoot someone. It's like, well, that feels really good. And obviously, we played a lot with the auto aim support as well to make it work. But yeah, that sort of that controller and that sort of feel of it, and it just worked well, we thought.
So what are your thoughts on the continued success that GoldenEye has in terms of just, what people think about it even today? And obviously people like me still talking about it and want to talk to you.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, it was the anniversary of it, the year before last, and I went to a few shows, got invited to quite a few shows to do talks about it and sign boxes and those kinds of things. And it's lovely. It really is. It's you think of, my mother was a nurse, and she helped people get better, and my father built buildings for people to live in, and they're still standing in places, and I make video games, which is, feels like a very pointless, ephemeral thing. But when you make a game like GoldenEye, and clearly so many people bought it and enjoyed it and loved it and still love it, and like I said, even now when I talk to people and they find out I make GoldenEye, I keep getting blamed for people not getting the degree they should have got because they spent all their evenings at the university playing deathmatch with their mates. It's nice to know that you had that. I suppose it's like someone who writes a really good song that keeps getting played on the radio year after year after year. It's consoles obviously get old, and the games. I've got all my old consoles, and occasionally I fire them up, and usually the game that you remember is a bit of a disappointment, but every now and then you'll play one and actually you think, yeah, this is still a great game. And so it's nice to know that it stood the test despite the technology issues. It stood the test of time. Songs, music, pretty much last forever because the technology doesn't matter so much. But with a video game, it does. But so if you make a game that has a bit of longevity in it, then you feel really honored and surprised. But it was we had no expectations when we made it, and it was so much fun to make. Even if no one had bought it, you'd still look back on it and think, oh, that was a fun time making that game. The game I'm most proud of that I've made in my time, probably, GoldenEye obviously, but Second Sight that we made at Free Radical, for me, I loved that game, and it was the last game that I did a lot of the artwork on, and I thought I'd reached my peak artistically, and I thought we told a really interesting story, and it had some great elements in it, and it didn't sell very well, and not many people remember it now. But it's like to do a game where everyone still remembers it and everyone talks about it. That's nice. It's slightly. Time Splitters, the first one still, and the second one actually, not as big a success as GoldenEye, but it still has a very vociferous fan base who still talk about it and still like it. So it's nice to know that you created something that has a little bit of like a cult movie, isn't it? We'll watch it for decades to come because it's got something about it that resonates with people and they like it. So you've got a little bit of their brain permanently sort of wired into the thing you made.
I know a lot of people in retro gaming circles, obviously, and when they talk about what would you like remastered come up and all that, it is quite often Time Splitters is high up there.
Yes. There's a group that's been working on Time Splitters Rewind for quite a long time. I don't know where they're getting with it, but I follow the Facebook group, and it's like it's every now and then they post some stuff, and it's like, okay, they're still making it. It's like
yeah.
So Time Splitters was just such a silly game, and it took an awful lot of stuff that we learned from GoldenEye and Perfect Dark and just transferred it into our own IP. And it's funny how that game, particularly the second one, people really, really enjoy that. Again, it was one of those games where, a bit like GoldenEye, we weren't sure if we were just making something that was a bit too personal and a bit, it was quirky. It was very British in its humour, and and actually, it wasn't a huge success in the US. It was a much bigger success in the UK and Europe and Australia and places like that. But it's still nice that you created something that had a bit of character, because there's so many first-person shooters that come out and they're good, but then they kind of just merge into the rest of them. But we managed to make a game that's got a bit of personality and character to it, and that's nice.
I think as well that, like you were saying about the multiplayer, that was the pinnacle of sort of the couch co-op, the multiplayer with friends.
Yeah.
Because now it's all online, and personally I don't really get the same satisfaction playing someone online as I do sitting next to my friend, and look, you can see their face, and
yeah. And totally, we were of that generation that split screen had come in a bit before, and we had the power to do 4-player split screen, and we just had so much, and we'd done a lot of that while we were developing. We were playing a lot of Doom, network Doom, and we were playing these other, these flight simulators and things where we were shooting each other down in tank ones. And our big lunchtime game was Bomberman, which we absolutely love, 4-player Bomberman, all on one screen. And the fun with that was just, absolutely ribbing each other to bits. Duncan in particular would take his losses very bad. I mean, I was crap at it anyway, so I knew I was going to lose. But Duncan would get particularly upset about it. And it was that whole, people getting really annoyed and gagging up on each other and all this kind of stuff. And we thought, I agree with that sort of 4 people around a screen is still brilliant. And, there was a lot of uncertainty about the 4-player split screen. I mean, it's well known that GoldenEye, we didn't actually tell Rare for a while that we were making a multiplayer split screen version. We did that in the evenings privately to get it running first, to check that it was fun. And when we first presented it, there were quite a few people saying, well, you can see the other person's screen, so it's not going to work. It doesn't work. You can see the other person. But actually, it makes we know it doesn't make any difference at all. It's perfectly good. It makes, you're busy looking at your screen. Maybe you do glance at the other screen from time to time to see where someone is, but it doesn't detract from the game. So, there was a lot of concern that it wouldn't, 4-player split screen on a first-person shooter wouldn't work, and it totally does. Of course it does.
Absolutely.
It's fun because you get to insult the person next to you when you take them out from behind. So
yeah, it's always one that gets pulled out when I have friends over, or back in the days when we used to be able to have friends over.
Yes.
Yeah, we always pull a bit of GoldenEye out.
Yeah, it's you don't want to, being in the room with someone is still a great experience, and you don't want to miss out on that. And all the best multiplayer games generally work around that kind of idea, I think.
I think we kind of covered all my questions, Karl. Now, are there any other interesting stories or tidbits you think that I might have missed that people will be interested to hear about? That's very vague, I know.
I think we've probably covered most of it. It was, I mean, it was an enormously fun game to make. That I think it's a hard thing to convey now. But the team was very closely knit, and we spent a lot of time crafting things together and just having fun with it. And the evening death matches particularly. I mean, I've said it before, but the secret hiding places in the complex, things like that. That was purely came out of me cheating, because I was getting my ass handed to me playing the multiplayer. And they put the radar on, and I really hated that because it showed you where you were. So I thought, well, if they're going to cheat by doing that, then I'm going to cheat. So I went and changed the backgrounds and built in these little hut cubbies with the one-way walls, which you could do, and didn't tell anyone. And they couldn't work out that evening we were playing, and no one could work out how I kept coming out from places they didn't know I was, and killing them from behind, And then it stayed in the game because they said, actually, that's really funny. We'll just leave it in, So they went. And so it's like having that ability to play the game with each other and, make really quick changes. That was done in one afternoon. It was just like, right, tonight, I know we're going to be playing the complex tonight. I'm going to change it, and I'm going to put these little cubby holes in there, and I'm going to hide in them and come out and kill people. And it just worked. So
that's great.
You're cheating. Yep. And it works. So
do you have a favorite multiplayer map? Would that be it, complex?
Probably, because it was the first one I did. It was the test one that we built. And if you look at it, it's got pretty much every idea under the sun in it, because it was just me trying everything out. So there's a room full of columns, and there's things that overlook other spaces, and there's narrow bits, and there's open bits, and um, it was designed to be super cheap, so it would run as fast as possible, because I knew we had 4 players, split screen with guns and bombs going off. So it's fundamentally a black and white level, because it uses intensity textures, because that was the biggest res I could get, and it was stuck onto very large simplified polys to try and keep the count down to the minimum. So in that sense, it's probably the purest, of the levels. I mean, there's other ones that look a lot better. I love the Aztec level. I had so much fun doing that level because of all the Moonraker stuff, which is one of my favorite Bond movies. But that one's the purest in that sense. I did nicer work in Perfect Dark. I think there were probably better multiplayer levels in Perfect Dark, but that one sort of sits in your heart as being the sort of the original,
Mm.
So yeah, it was a good one.
Well, I think it's funny that it was such a, I don't want to say afterthought, but it was a late sort of addition, the multiplayer. But it really did have a huge impact on multiplayer gaming, especially for first-person shooters.
Yes, yeah. So it was, from our point of view, it was a no-brainer, because we'd had so much fun playing these other multiplayer games, and we thought we just have to. And I remember sitting around the day that we would think, and you were saying, well, I think it was all of us were sitting around, and this discussion was like, well, I think looking at the performance, I think we can do a split screen 4-player, and it shouldn't hurt the performance too much. And it was Steve Ellis, obviously, who went off. He joined the team a bit later, and it was one of the first things I think he was asked to work on by Mike. Said, look, just go and see if you can get this running split screen and see what it does. And I mean, Steve's an awesome programmer, and he came off, and literally within a couple of hours, it was running 2-player split screen. It's like, right, can we do 4-player? Yeah, we can do 4-player too. And it's like, okay. And then it was like, okay, Karl, can you start making an environment specifically for this that's a bit cheaper, that can run to these sorts of specs? So I started building that, and within 2 or 3 days, we had a multiplayer, an early version of the complex running and playing, and it's like, it was just like, yeah, this is so much fun. And we were playing it in the evenings, and then I think it was Simon Farmer came over, who was the production manager at Rare, and he saw us playing this, and he's like, "What's the hell's that?" And it's like, "Oh, it's got 4-player split screen, and and you can imagine from his point of view, at that point, GoldenEye was pretty late. The movie had already come out, and he's like, "You're wasting your time making a multiplayer version. You haven't even got the main game done yet. What are you guys doing?" I was like, "Yeah, but this is fun." And he sat down and played it with us, and had a huge amount. And the next night, we had a whole load of other people come over and stuff. It went around the whole company that we'd done this multiplayer version, and people were coming over to try it, and then going, "Okay, yeah, so much fun." It's just so it's like, it was just like, yeah, what we should have done. And as soon as it went to Nintendo, and they saw it, they're like, "Yeah, that's great," which is probably why they in the end it was like, okay, however long it takes to make this good, fine, we'll cope with it, because they could see that it was just fun, and it's a video game. It's supposed to sort of dark and miserable, gloomy sort of games. It's like, this is a fun game. And that is Nintendo. Nintendo was all about multiplayer fun, from the early days of Mario Kart. It's like, this is okay, the subject may not be Nintendo, but this multiplayer part of the game, this is Nintendo. So I think that probably one of the things that helped save the game in that sense, that it was that much fun that they weren't ever gonna kill it, or just tell us to stop and throw it out at that point. It was like, no, okay, this is worth spending some more time and money on. So
absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a nice place to end. Saying that it was fun, and kind of Nintendo's thing is fun. I like that.
I'm still a big Nintendo fanboy. And I still admire, although I love techie and high tech and the very best consoles and the best technology. I mean, these days I work a lot in mobile, but that Nintendo, the essence of games has to be fun. And one of the things I like about mobile actually is a lot of it is still very 2D and a bit more old school in some of the design concepts, because the big complex 3D games don't work well on mobile, but the simple games with really good game mechanics do work really well on mobile. And so it's that kind of ethic again of going back to really good, pure quality game design, which I really like. So that's a Nintendo thing, and it's something a lesson I learned early on at Rare, that's what really matters. It's not all the shininess, and it's not all the sound special effects, and it's not all the rendering tech that makes the game good. It's the underlying core gameplay, and everything else is just dressing.
And obviously, I mean, Rare's beginnings as Ultimate Play the Game back in the Spectrum days and the BBC Micro, it was all about the quality of the gameplay and how fun it was, because you didn't have much, many frills and bells and whistles.
Yeah, totally. It's I mean, Rare games were very good looking for their time, but the fundamental thing about them was that they ran well. They had a good frame rate. They had concise controls. You knew what you were supposed to do. They were difficult but not too difficult. They had the balance of that stuff was great, and they learned that, and that's obviously what Nintendo saw in them when they started working with them. And same thing with the Miyamoto games. It's understanding what the core mechanics are and what makes the game fun, and then everything else around it is extra. So yeah, that's certainly in the DNA of Rare right from the start, and in the Ultimate Play the games demonstrated that really well. So yeah, it's like I said, it was great to get offered the job at Rare. I was like, you look back and go, well, what lucky breaks have you had in life? Well, probably getting that letter through the door that morning saying, would you like to come work at Rare? I was like, yeah, that's probably one of the key ones. I wish I still had the letter. I don't know what I did with it. I should have had it framed, really. But
That's great. Thank you so much for talking to me, Karl. It's been great. I don't know when this thing will be done, but
sure,
it will at some point. I'll send you a link to the finished thing.
Yeah, quality takes time. So whatever it's done, yeah.
Be out in 3 years.
Far be it to criticise anyone for not getting something done.
Thank you. I've got a few other of the rest of the team to catch up with, and then I'll whack it all together. But that's all been really, really great info, and I really, really do appreciate it. And it's lovely to speak to someone who made one of my all-time favourite games, of course.
Thank you very much, and appreciate you've enjoyed it so much. It's always nice to. I never get bored of talking to people who enjoy playing GoldenEye. It's, you think you would, but you don't. It's always great to hear that people enjoyed it and you're still playing it. Kudos. A few times when I've been to things and people have asked me to play deathmatch with them, I'm just like, oh, I'm so out of it now. It's like, Jesus, but they get to say that they thrashed one of the makers of GoldenEye on GoldenEye, so yeah, that's fine.
Hopefully I'll get the chance one day.
Yeah, it'd be great to meet up sometime when all this COVID nonsense is over. Yes. So yeah, well, good luck with it all anyway.
Thank you very much.
Anything else you think of, you know how to get in touch with me, so happy to answer anything else if you think of anything else.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Okay.
Have a good night.
You too.
Cheers, Karl.
Bye bye.